Cramming. This is the practice of attempting to absorb large amounts of information in a very short period just before an exam or deadline. It stems from the natural human tendency to delay uncomfortable tasks combined with the reality of high-pressure academic schedules, unlike spaced repetition, which builds long-term neural pathways over weeks. Cramming relies solely on short-term working memory that degrades almost immediately after the test is over. It remains incredibly popular because it often yields just enough immediate recall to pass a test the next morning, creating a false reward cycle that ultimately sabotages true learning and retention. Passive reading. This involves scanning text linearly without pausing to summarize, question, or actively engage with the material being presented. It arises from early childhood reading habits where the primary goal was simply decoding words to follow an easy narrative story. It is a wildly common mistake because it feels highly productive and requires very low cognitive energy, tricking students into thinking they are studying when they are actually just passing their eyes over words. Multitasking. This is the act of attempting to study while simultaneously watching a video, texting friends, or listening to highly distracting music. It grew out of the modern digital landscape where screens constantly compete for attention and social media notifications are explicitly engineered to distract. Unlike focused deep work, multitasking physically forces the brain to rapidly switch context back and forth, creating attention residue and significantly slowing down processing speed. It is a pervasive habit because the constant dopamine hits from digital devices make single tasking feel boring, which severely fractures the deep concentration required to grasp complex subjects. Procrastination. This is the irrational delay of academic responsibilities despite knowing perfectly well that there will be negative consequences later. Rooted deeply in evolutionary psychology, it is essentially an emotional coping mechanism for stress, anxiety, or fear of failure, rather than a simple issue of poor time management. It affects almost every student at some point because the modern educational system relies heavily on self-directed study, making it easy to fall into a cycle of avoidance and last-minute panic. Skipping foundations. This occurs when a student moves on to advanced topics or complex mathematical problems without fully mastering the basic underlying principles first. It usually originates from a rushed curriculum, internal pressure to keep up with peers, or simply a desire to finish homework as fast as possible to gain free time. This approach treats education as a checklist of isolated tasks to complete, rather than a cumulative building process where each new concept relies heavily on the structural integrity of the last. It is a critical mistake because once the foundational knowledge gap becomes too wide, higher-level material becomes completely impossible to understand, leading to sudden academic burnout and intense frustration. Highlighting everything. This is the practice of dragging a neon marker over nearly every sentence or paragraph on a textbook page. It began decades ago as a targeted tool to make key definitions or dates stand out, but it evolved into a nervous habit for students who are unsure of what is actually important in the text. Rather than filtering and synthesizing information, excessive highlighting actually flattens the visual hierarchy of the text, making everything look equally important so that nothing stands out at all,